Imagine the night so complete that even the idea of light feels like a rumor. You are alone on a low wooden deck, 3,000 miles of black water rocking beneath you, breathing slow and heavy like something alive. No moon, no glow on the horizon, just the soft slap of waves against the hull and the faint creak of rope older than any city walls. Most of us, if dropped here, would feel terror crawl up the spine within minutes. We would clutch phones that have no signal, whisper prayers to satellites that cannot hear us, and bargain with a sky that refuses to answer. Yet there were men and women who asked for nights exactly like this, nights without mercy, without landmarks, without forgiveness, because only then could they prove the impossible was ordinary. These were the Polynesian wayfinders, the Phoenician merchants, the Viking dragon ship captains. They did not wait for clear skies. They chose the blackest ones, the ones that swallow modern sailors whole. And on those nights they slept easiest, because the darker the heavens, the louder the directions became. We have been told the ocean is a place that erases people. They knew it was a place that remembers everything. Where we see emptiness, they felt conversation. Where we see chaos, they felt rhythm. The same sky that terrifies us was, to them, a trusted friend who never once lied about the way home. Close your eyes for a moment and feel the deck beneath you. Notice how the fear begins to loosen its grip, how the darkness stops feeling hostile and starts feeling watchful. Something is listening, something is waiting to show you what those ancient sailors already understood. The night is not absent of guidance, it is overflowing with it. You simply have to learn the language it speaks when no one else is around to translate. And the only way to grasp how they could trust a sky darker than any we have ever known is to travel back, farther than maps, farther than metal, farther than the very idea of north itself. 5,000 years ago, the world had not yet decided where north would live. There was no arrow on a compass, no letter N carved into stone. There was only the great turning roof of stars, slow and patient, sliding across the blackness from dusk until dawn. And into that turning roof stepped the first people willing to leave the sight of land forever. Picture a raft of lashed reeds, or a canoe sewn together from bark and coconut fibre, sliding away from a low green shoreline while the fires of the village shrink to sparks. Children sleep curled against their mothers. Grandfathers sit in the bow, eyes fixed upward. They carry no charts because paper has not been invented. They carry no bronze because bronze has not been dreamed. They carry only stories, songs, and a lifetime of watching the same performance every single night since the day they could walk. To them, the sky was never decoration. It was a living calendar that announced planting season by the rising of certain bright wanderers, warned of storms when others hid themselves and, most crucially, pointed the way across water wider than continents. Every star had a name, a personality, a temper. Some were reliable older brothers who always appeared on time. Others were tricksters who tried to lead you east when you needed west, and the only way to master them was to know their habits better than your own. These early sailors felt the first deliberate vanishing of land behind them, not as abandonment, but as promotion. On shore, you were merely human. Out here, beneath the moving map, you became part of the mechanism itself. The ocean did not want to kill them, it wanted to teach them, and the price of the lesson was simple. Memorize everything. Every swell direction, every bird flight, cloud shape, and, above all, the precise order in which the sky unfolded its directions each night. Miss a single cue, and an island the size of a postage stamp would slide past unseen, taking your future with it. They paid the price gladly, generation after generation, until the map lived inside their blood and bones, a map that could never be lost, never burn, never sink. And at the center of this breathing, spinning map was one point of light that broke all the rules of the performance. One actor who refused to take a bow and exit stage left with the others. In every corner of the planet, separated by deserts, ice, and oceans wider than imagination, different peoples looked up and noticed the same quiet rebellion. Almost every star marched in orderly procession across the night, rising in the east, climbing, then slipping away in the west. All but one. There, near the hub of the great wheel, hung a single pale flame that barely moved. Night after night, year after year, it stayed nailed to the same spot while the entire universe spun around it. To the reindeer herders of the frozen north, it was the nail of the sky, holding the heavens in place. To the priests on the Nile, it was the imperishable one, eternal as the pharaohs wished to be. To the children of tiny Pacific atolls, it was simply the star that does not walk. And every culture that reached the open sea eventually built their entire relationship with the night around this one quiet stranger. Children were brought outside before they could properly speak and lifted toward that light. Old men whispered to it the names of everyone about to sail. Young women etched its position into shell and bone, so their husbands would always have a fixed heart to return to. Some peoples danced beneath it until dawn. Others fasted for days just to feel worthy of its guidance. They did not worship it as a god. They courted it as the most dependable friend a wandering human could ever have. Because once you had introduced yourself properly to that unmoving light, something extraordinary happened. The rest of the sky suddenly made sense. It became a clock with one hand that never trembled. It became a compass whose needle was forged before the earth itself cooled. And yet, as every master navigator quietly knew, this brightest, most faithful point was never the whole secret. It was only the first word in a language made of hundreds of moving lights, each with its own story to tell, each with its own path to guide you safely through the dark. Long before anyone thought to draw a line on paper and call it a route, a boy of 7 sat cross-legged on warm coral sand while the village fires died to embers. Above him, the sky opened like a slow theatre curtain, and his grandfather the navigator began to speak, not in sentences, but in names. Ku, Hokulea, Manaya Kalani, Nahiku. Each name belonged to a star that would rise at a precise moment and walk a precise path across the night. Miss one entrance, the old man murmured, and the canoe drifts forever. Remember them all, and the ocean becomes a garden with gates you alone can open. That boy would grow to command voyages longer than the span of Europe, guided only by those names and the silent promise they kept. The system was called star paths, unbroken chains of bright guides, each handing the canoe off to the next like runners passing a torch. One star rose dead ahead when you pointed the bow toward Tahiti. When it climbed too high, another took its place, always on the same invisible line. By dawn, the final star slipped into the sea exactly where the island was waiting, as if the heavens themselves had rehearsed the performance for 10,000 years. 220 stars were required for mastery, not numbers on a chart, living companions with moods and habits. Some rose angry and red in storm season, others appeared gentle and white when the trades blew steady. The navigator learned to greet them the way sailors once greeted ports, with different customs and different dangers. The sky became an immense clockwork play, performed nightly for an audience of one canoe, and the price of a single forgotten cue was measured in generations lost. We think of memory as fragile. They treated it as muscle. Night after night, year after year, the paths were recited, sung, danced into the body, until the stars lived behind the eyelids as clearly as behind the sky. Modern tests show these men could point to an island 2,000 miles away with less than 1 degree of error, better than most ships manage today when clouds hide the satellites. And still, on the longest passages, when the sky gave its flawless directions, the greatest masters would smile and say the stars were only the first voice. The ocean itself was waiting to speak in a language felt through the bones. Lie down on the deck now, palms flat against the warm wood, and let the canoe rock you the way it rocked them. Feel that long, slow lift from the southeast, then the quicker, sharper push from the northeast crossing beneath it. Two invisible rivers of water, born on opposite sides of the planet, meeting here under your body and telling stories only a trained spine can translate. This was wave piloting, reading the ocean's pulse the way a blind man reads Braille. Every island, every undersea mountain, every distant storm left its own signature in the swells, some wide and lazy, some tight and nervous, some carrying the faint echo of land hundreds of miles before land could possibly appear. The navigator did not look for these patterns. He became the place where they met. Hours turned into days of silent listening until the different wave trains sorted themselves into clear voices. This one born near Hawaii, this one bent around the Marquesas, this faint shiver announcing Tahiti still 3 nights away. In the 1950s, a skeptical anthropologist asked the master navigator Hippor to prove the claims. They blindfolded him, spun the canoe for hours until even the crew lost all sense of direction, then removed the cloth. Without hesitation, Hippor raised one steady finger and pointed across empty water. 2 days later, land rose exactly there, an island 12 miles long, hidden beyond the curve of the earth. He had felt it singing beneath the hull the entire time. The ocean keeps diaries written in motion. A storm 1,000 miles south leaves its anger in a rolling hill of water that travels for weeks. Coral reefs bend passing swells into secret arrows that point straight back to themselves like compass needles made of liquid. During the calmest weather, the differences are gentle, almost tender. During storms, they become a roaring choir that would confuse any machine. Yet somehow the human body, balanced on a fragile outrigger, learns to separate every voice and trust the quietest one of all. The whisper that says home is still there, still breathing, still waiting. Stars could be hidden for weeks by cloud. Waves almost never stopped speaking, but even this deep conversation had limits. When typhoons turned the sea into white chaos, when every swell lied and screamed at once, the navigators turned to the only messengers that could still see through the madness. Creatures that carried entire islands inside their wings. At the first pale hint of dawn, when the stars grew shy and slipped away, the navigator climbed to the platform between the hulls and opened a young frigate bird, raised from the egg aboard the canoe, stepped onto his wrist. Its heart beat wild against his skin. With a soft word, he launched it upward. The bird climbed in widening circles, higher than any eye could follow, until it became a black speck against the grey sky. Then it chose a direction and flew. Land-nesting seabirds cannot drink salt water. By evening, they must return to fresh water and solid ground or die. A flock released at sunrise will scatter in every direction searching, but the moment one finds vegetation, it turns homeward in a straight, desperate line. The navigator watches which way the successful bird returns first, notes the bearing, and steers the canoe along the same invisible road. Sometimes the chosen bird comes back exhausted, feet stained green with crushed leaves, proof that an island is near enough to smell. They raised these birds like children, fed them fish mashed by hand, spoke to them in the soft voices reserved for lovers, taught them the canoe was their only home. To lose one was grief, to trust one was faith made flesh and feather. Every morning the same quiet ceremony. Open the woven cage, feel the small thunder of wings, watch the sky accept the wager of an entire people's future on the choice of a creature weighing less than a coconut. Stars gave the long backbone of the course, waves gave the fine tuning, birds gave the final promise that the world had not moved while you slept. 3 languages, none of them written, all of them perfect, until the centuries arrived, when the sky itself began to change its ancient bargains. Picture the year 1100 BCE. A master navigator stands on the deck of his double canoe, somewhere between Tonga and Fiji, waiting for the familiar pale flame that has guided his people since the first voyages. He waits. The wheel of stars turns. The place where the nail of the sky should hang is empty. Just a faint, useless scatter of light, too dim to trust. For the first time in living memory, the heavens have shrugged off their oldest promise. This was no local cloud cover. For roughly 400 years, the North Celestial Pole drifted through a dark gap. Polaris was still thousands of years away from sliding into position. Earlier, Thuban had been the pole star, but it too had wandered off. The axis of the world pointed at nothing useful. To us, this sounds like a minor astronomical footnote. To them, it was the sky had broken its contract. The one fixed heart of the night had vanished. Yet instead of retreat, the oceans filled with sails. The Lapita people swept eastward in a burst of colonization never matched until the age of steam. Settlements appeared on islands so remote that even birds hesitated to cross the water. How do you ask, did they dare? They adapted faster than seems humanly possible. Entire cultures abandoned the search for a single unmoving point and invented something far more fluid, a moving compass made of rising and setting stars, of memorized arcs, of whole constellations used as temporary norths that changed with latitude. Where we see crisis, they saw invitation. The empty pole forced them to memorize more sky than ever before, to trust motion instead of stillness, to treat the heavens as a dance rather than a statue. And in that forced improvisation, they accidentally perfected the most sophisticated wayfinding the world has ever known. The night the sky lost its center became the greatest age of open ocean exploration began. On a low coral island in the Carolines, the old men gathered the boys at dusk and led them to a circle of weathered stones half buried in sand. 32 stones, no two the same height, arranged like a silent crown around an empty space. This was the Pukov, a compass you could not carry, only visit. Each stone marked the exact place on the horizon where a particular star or constellation rose or set. Between the stones ran invisible lines, only the mind could follow. The teaching began with a single breath. The master placed a boy's hand on the stone for Sirius and whispered its name, its temper, its exact bearing. Then the next stone, and the next. By sunrise, the boy could close his eyes and still see the circle burning behind his eyelids. By the following year, he could recite the entire wheel in a low chant that never paused, never stumbled, a ribbon of sound that wrapped the island in directions no outsider could steal. 32 points, not the crude 4 or 8 we imagine. 32 distinct houses of the sky, each with its own guardian star, its own personality. One house belonged to the angry red star that rose only in storm season. Another to the pair of bright brothers that always appeared together like twins. The chant gave every house a name you felt in the chest, more than heard in the ear. To learn it properly took 7 years of nightly repetition until the tongue moved without thought and the body swayed gently to the rhythm of the turning world. Out at sea the stones were gone, but the circle travelled inside the navigator. He stood barefoot on the platform, eyes half closed, murmuring the chant under his breath, while the canoe flew across black water. When a certain star touched its remembered stone on the invisible horizon, he shifted the steering paddle a finger's width, and the course corrected itself before any crewman noticed the change. The compass was now flesh, blood, and song. No raider could burn it. No wave could wash it away.
They had built a compass you could not hold, only become. When every other sign fell silent, when storms erased the stars and scrambled the swells, the ocean authored one final, almost secret confirmation. On the last night before land, the navigator ordered the crew to trail their hands in the water and watch. Suddenly, the wake behind the paddle strokes, the hull itself began to ignite. Streaks of cold green fire raced away into the dark. Then, slowly, shapes appeared beneath the canoe. Long glowing ridges, pale branching corals, the faint outline of a lagoon entrance drawn in living light. Tilapa, they called it, the lightning in the sea. Tiny creatures disturbed by the passing hull flashed in patterns that mirrored the underwater mountains and valleys ahead. To the trained eye, the entire hidden island rose up as a ghost of turquoise flame directly below. They had reached the place where the sea itself drew the map. The closer the canoe came, the brighter and more detailed the phantom coastline grew, until the navigator could almost read individual reefs the way we read street signs. When the glowing outline finally matched the shape burned into memory from childhood, he spoke one quiet word, and the crew lowered the sail. The journey was over. Land was breathing just beyond the next swell. No instrument has ever captured this last conversation between sailor and sea. Satellites see cloud and current, but they remain blind to the soft underwater lantern that lights only for those who have listened long enough. These layered rituals, stars, waves, birds, and finally the glowing breath of the island itself, carried entire civilizations across the width of a planet for thousands of years, without a single recorded case of being truly lost. Until the day tall ships appeared on the horizon, carrying charts, crosses, and a quiet determination to make the old ways impossible to speak aloud. The year 1521. A double-hulled canoe slips into a quiet lagoon on Guam, returning from months at sea, with fish holds full and every soul alive. Spanish soldiers wait on the beach. They burn the canoe, smash the carved star sticks, and drag the navigator away in chains. His crime is not theft or violence. His crime is arriving exactly where he intended, without European tools. Possession of that knowledge, the priest writes in careful ink, is proof of commerce with the devil. Across the oceans the pattern repeated. In the Carolines, colonial officers banned the teaching of star courses. Any man caught reciting the 32 houses off the horizon faced prison. In Hawaii, children were beaten in mission schools for speaking the old names of stars. In the Maldives, British administrators ordered the stone compass circles broken up for road fill. The most accurate navigation system humanity ever produced, one that had kept people alive across half the planet for millennia, was declared superstition, then heresy, then simply forgotten.
They did not merely take the land, they took the sky. Charts printed in London and Lisbon were nailed to church doors as the new gospel. Straight lines, latitudes, mythical meridians. Anyone who claimed the ocean could be read like a song was mocked, fined, or quietly disappeared. Grandfathers stopped teaching grandsons at night. Mothers hushed the old sailing chants when footsteps approached the village. Within 2 generations, the living map inside thousands of minds began to fade, replaced by paper that tore, ink that ran, instruments that rusted the moment salt touched them. Yet memory is stubborn. On back porches, in hidden groves, inside dreams, fragments survived. A single star path whispered to a child who swore never to forget. A wave pattern described with hands in the dark. A bird-releasing ceremony performed in silence, so the wind itself would not betray them. The war against the night sky was fierce and thorough, but it never quite managed to kill what had been carried in blood for 50 centuries. By the middle of the 20th century, only a handful remained who could still hear the ocean speak its full language. On the tiny atoll of Satawal lived Mau Piailug, born into a lineage of navigators at a time when almost no one wanted the burden anymore. He learned the star compass the ancient way, lying on his back for nights on end, while his father traced invisible lines across the sky with a finger, naming every house until the boy could recite them asleep or awake. Mao grew into a quiet man with calm eyes who could stand on a moving canoe and feel Tahiti breathing 2,000 miles away. Far to the east, on Puluat, the elder Hipor kept the old chants alive by teaching them only to his daughter's sons after midnight, when patrol boats rarely passed. And on the remote island of Tomako, Tavake, nearly blind from age, could still point across an empty deck and name every swell by the island that gave it birth. In 1976, the world watched something it believed impossible. Mau Piailug stepped aboard Hokulea, a reconstructed double canoe with no engine, no compass, no charts, and guided her 31 days across open water from Hawaii to Tahiti. When the green mountains of Matavai Bay rose exactly where his inner compass said they would, thousands waited on the beach in tears. Not because the canoe had arrived, but because the ancestors had arrived with it. One man, carrying nothing but memory, had just proven that every colonial textbook had lied. Mao never smiled for the cameras. He simply looked up at the familiar stars and said, "They still know the way." A few years later, Hipor allowed himself to be blindfolded and spun for hours by researchers. When the cloth came off, he pointed unerringly toward home. Tavake took students on voyages until he was 90, steering by the taste of the wind alone. They were the last unbroken links, the final keepers of a library stored only in human minds. When they began to die, it felt as if the night itself was growing thinner. Then, almost too late, something shifted. In Hawaii, a small group of stubborn dreamers decided the sky could be reclaimed. They rebuilt the old canoes plank by plank, wove sails from pandanus the ancient way, and went looking for the last masters willing to teach. Mau Piailug, already old, crossed the ocean one final time, not for glory, but because someone had finally asked properly. He stood on the deck of Hokulea again and began passing the star compass to young men and women who had never known a night without electric light. Since that first revival voyage in 1976, Hokulea and her sister canoes have sailed over 150,000 miles, every inch guided only by sun, stars, waves, and birds. A new generation now stands barefoot on the same platforms their ancestors used, feeling the same swells, greeting the same stars by their old intimate names. Children in Polynesia, Micronesia, even Scandinavia and Japan are learning the 32 houses again. The chants are rising once more after midnight, no longer in hiding. On clear evenings, you can stand on almost any shore and see a canoe sliding past under sail, silent except for the soft voices reciting directions older than Rome. The night sky, almost erased from human memory, is speaking again, and it has not changed its language at all. It only waited, patient as tide, for people willing to close their phones, lift their eyes, and remember how to listen. Something even stranger has begun happening in our century, something the old masters would have smiled at without surprise. The knowledge is leaving the islands and traveling to places the ancestors never imagined.
Leave the wide Pacific behind now and slip into the narrow, jealous waters of the ancient Mediterranean, where the coastline twists like a secret. Here, 3,000 years ago, lived a people who never wrote down their true name for the stars. We call them Phoenicians. They called themselves the children of the purple fishes, because they alone knew how to coax royal dye from sea snails, and they painted their sails that impossible color, so the night itself would know whose ships were moving beneath it. Their cities, Tyre, Sidon, Byblos, were fortresses of cedar and silence. Inside windowless rooms lit only by oil lamps, a father would wait until his eldest son was old enough to keep a secret worth more than gold. Then, in whispers that barely stirred the air, he would name the true rising points of the bright stars along every hidden cove from Cyprus to the Pillars of Heracles. No tablets, no scrolls. Ink was for merchants counting amphorae of wine. Star knowledge was for blood. They navigated differently from the island peoples. Where Polynesians rode the open ocean, Phoenicians hugged coastlines they had turned into private highways. Every headland, every hidden bay had its own star that rose or set directly behind it, when you stood in the right place. A captain needed only to keep that star balanced on a mast tip or a distant cliff, and the ship slid forward as if on rails. Outsiders saw rocky chaos. Phoenicians saw a necklace of light they had strung themselves. In 600 BCE, the Egyptian pharaoh Necho wanted proof that Africa had an island. He paid Phoenician captains an unthinkable fortune to sail south until the sun rose on their left, then keep going until it rose on their right again. Greek historians laughed at the story later. How could the sun ever rise on the right? The Phoenicians simply returned 3 years later with ivory, gold, and silence. They had followed a ring of stars that circled the entire continent, a ring no one else knew existed because no one else had spent centuries memorizing every inlet and current from the Red Sea to the Atlantic. The purple sails came home heavy with secrets the gods themselves had sold them. Even they, the proudest merchants of antiquity, knew there were colder waters where daylight barely existed, and another people had learned to steer by stone instead of fire. Far north, where winter swallows the sun for months, the Vikings built dragon ships that slipped through fog thicker than wool. Their nights were not dark. They were simply another kind of white. Snow in the air, snow on the sea, cloud above cloud until the world became a single blurred breath. In that blinding sameness, they still found Greenland, Iceland, and, for a fleeting moment, the vineyards of Vinland. Their secret lay in a piece of clear crystal the sagas called Solstein, sunstone. When the sky offered nothing, no horizon, no stars, no faint glow, the navigator would duck into the dim hold,
Pull a rough chunk of Icelandic spar from a leather pouch and hold it toward the place where the sun ought to be. A pale blue-white ghost would appear inside the stone, a thin line of light that pointed straight to the hidden sun, even through miles of storm. Turn the crystal until the line grew brightest, note the direction on the bearing dial, and the ship could crawl forward when every other vessel would drift in circles until it died. Imagine the scene: driving snow hissing against the sail, men huddled in sealskin, breath freezing on beards. The navigator lifts the stone to a sky the color of steel. For a moment, nothing. Then the faint line flickers alive, steady as a heartbeat. He nods once, the steersman shifts the oar, and the dragon prow noses forward again. They sail by a piece of rock that can see what human eyes cannot. Church scholars later called it witchcraft. The stones were confiscated, hidden, forgotten. Yet in 2024, physicists in Hungary took museum specimens of Viking-age calcite, flew them into real storms above the Atlantic, and watched the same blue line appear with eerie precision, accurate to within 1 degree. The heresy worked. On the longest nights of the year, when the sun itself deserted them, the Northmen navigated by a mineral older than any star. But even stone has limits when the sky is clear and warm.
In the blazing deserts and monsoon winds of another ocean, a different people reduced the entire heavens to the length of a piece of string. South of the equator, where the trades blow fierce and steady, Arab and Swahili captains on lateen-rigged dhows carried a tool so simple it looked like a child's toy. A small rectangular plate of wood or bone with a hole in the center, and a knotted cotton cord tied through it. This was the kamal. At dusk, the captain stepped onto the poop deck, held the plate at arm's length toward Polaris or the Southern Cross, slid the knot along the string until the star's light just touched the top edge while the horizon touched the bottom. The knot that lined up told him his exact latitude without calculation. Next knot south, next island. 1 knot north, reef to avoid. The string was marked in finger widths passed down from father to son for centuries, each knot a silent conversation with the sky. With this thread and tablet, they crossed from Sumatra to Madagascar in the roaring 40s, rode monsoons like scheduled trains, arrived within hours of prediction after months at sea. No tables of numbers, no logarithms, just a piece of cord that forced the stars to confess their height above the world every single night. When storms hid the guiding lights, they simply waited for the briefest clear moment, measured once, and trusted the knots for weeks. Every ocean, it seemed, grew its own way to speak with the night. Phoenicians kept their stars secret in purple rooms. Vikings trapped the sun inside crystal. Arabs tied the sky to a string. Yet all of them would have looked with quiet wonder at one tiny archipelago where the water was so shallow, the islands so low, that the people there learned to read the stars twice, once above the waves, and once reflected perfectly beneath them. Imagine an ocean so gentle that the islands barely rise above it. Some atolls are only a handspan higher than the highest tide. A strong wave can roll across the village and retreat as if nothing happened. These are the Maldives, 2,000 specks of coral and palm scattered across 800 miles of blue, so fragile that maps sometimes forget them. Yet for 2,000 years, the Devehi sailors who lived here never lost a single ship to the open sea. A boy of 14 named Ahmed stood on the stern of a sailing Odie one evening, barefoot on warm teak, while the old captain pointed south. "Look low," he whispered. "There, where the sky almost touches the water."
Two faint, misty patches drifted just above the horizon. The large and small Magellanic Clouds, galaxies invisible from anywhere north of the equator. To Ahmed, they looked like torn pieces of the Milky Way that had fallen and decided to stay. The captain told him these were not clouds at all, but permanent arrows hung there by an older world. When the northeast monsoon blew, you steered by the left edge of the larger patch to reach Sri Lanka. When the southwest monsoon returned, you followed the right edge of the smaller one home. Every night, the boy lay on the roof of the boat and learned to read those distant galaxies the way other children read picture books. They never moved from their posts. They simply waited, patient as lighthouses made of 100 billion stars, guiding fragile wooden boats across distances that swallowed empires. Their homeland was so low, it could vanish beneath a sigh of water. Yet the sky had given them guides no storm could drown. The greatest secret, however, was kept beneath the surface. When the moon was new and the sea lay black as ink, the master navigators slipped over the side without a sound. They carried no torches, they needed none. A gentle kick stirred the plankton, and the reef woke up in cold green fire. Coral heads glowed like pale moons, branches of staghorn traced silver rivers, and the entire lagoon floor lit up in a perfect negative image of the night sky overhead. They dove not for fish, but for memory. Every atoll has its own fingerprint of coral. A certain mushroom-shaped head here, a long ridge shaped like a crescent there, a cluster of table corals arranged exactly like the Pleiades. The navigators memorized these patterns the same way Polynesian children memorized rising stars, by name, by story, by the way the current felt when it slid across them. When bioluminescence painted the reef, Orion appeared upside down beneath their feet. Scorpio crawled across the sand in living light. The same constellations they used above water were duplicated below, only clearer, closer, intimate. Years later, returning after a voyage to Aceh or Zanzibar, the captain would order the crew to kill every lamp. Then he would dive alone. If the glowing reef beneath the keel matched the sky picture burned into his mind since childhood, he surfaced smiling. They were home. If the pattern was even slightly wrong, he knew they had drifted to a neighboring atoll and corrected course before dawn. The reef never lied. It carried the island's secret signature the way a person carries a face. They learned the shapes of the stars twice, once in the burning black above, once in the quiet green below. Heaven and ocean were not separate. They were mirrors, and the men who could read both never needed to ask the way. This perfect harmony lasted until engines and steel hulls arrived, until satellites promised to do the remembering for them. Most islands quietly retired the old skills. Most, but not all. In 1987, a 70-year-old captain named Ibrahim stood on the pier in Malé and accepted a wager no one thought he could win. A brand new cargo ship with the latest GPS challenged his wooden Odie to race to Colombo and back. The prize was simple: pride. The cargo captain laughed. Ibrahim only smiled and said, "We will leave at the dark of the moon." They sailed on the same night. The modern ship vanished into the monsoon with engines roaring. Ibrahim's Odie slipped away under sail alone. No radio, no charts, no lights after sunset. For 12 days the ocean gave them everything it had. Rain that erased the horizon, winds that shifted hourly, one full cyclone spinning directly across their path. The GPS ship lost signal for 36 hours and limped into Colombo 2 days late. Ibrahim arrived 8 hours early. When the cyclone hit, the young crew begged to turn on the emergency beacon. The old man refused. He went forward, lay flat on the deck with his cheek against the planks, and listened to the different swells fighting beneath the hull. After a while he stood, pointed into absolute blackness and said, "Steer there." They obeyed. Dawn revealed Sri Lanka exactly where his finger had aimed. On the return leg, the GPS failed again. The cargo captain radioed apologies and asked for a heading. Ibrahim's only reply, crackling across the waves, was laughter and 5 quiet words. "Now it's fair." He brought the Odie home through another storm, diving twice in the dark to read the glowing reef until the familiar shape of his birth lagoon rose beneath him like an old friend. The bet was paid in silence. No speeches, no cameras, just an old man walking down the gangplank at sunrise while the crew touched his feet in respect. Some knowledge refuses to die. Some knowledge only waits, patient as the Magellanic clouds, for the moment when machines stutter and the sea remembers who truly owns it. And in laboratories far from any reach, scientists have begun to understand why these forgotten skills will not stay buried. In 2016, a quiet research vessel left Hawaii, carrying 3 master navigators and a team of neuroscientists with portable MRI machines. For 30 days, the navigators steered the canoe the old way, while the scientists watched their brains in real time. What appeared on the screens looked impossible. The hippocampus, the seahorse-shaped knot of tissue that builds spatial maps, was visibly larger than in any control group. In some cases, it had grown by almost 20% beyond average, packed with extra grey matter the way a weightlifter's muscles swell from use. London taxi drivers, famous for the knowledge of 25,000 streets, show similar growth, but their maps fit inside one city. These men carried the entire Pacific inside their skulls. Every swell direction, every star path, every invisible island drawn in 3 dimensions across 4,000 miles of water. The scans revealed something stranger. While navigating, the hippocampus did not work alone. It pulsed in perfect rhythm with the prefrontal cortex and the visual streams that process motion, creating a living, breathing model of the ocean that updated itself second by second. When clouds hid the stars, the map did not fade. It simply shifted to the memory of wave patterns and bird flights stored in the same swollen tissue. The brain had become the chart room, the compass, the lookout, and the logbook all at once. Scientists expected the changes to appear only in elders who had navigated for decades. They found the same enlarged structures in apprentices barely out of their teens. The brain, it seemed, reshaped itself the moment it accepted the responsibility of never being allowed to be lost. Their minds literally grew to match the size of the task. Paper could never hold what they carried. The sky was too large, so the skull quietly expanded to contain it. Yet the most startling discovery had nothing to do with size. Deep in the same voyages, the researchers began drawing blood at dusk and dawn. They were looking for stress markers, expecting cortisol spikes from sleepless nights at sea. Instead, they found something that made the endocrinologists stare at the vials in silence. During long passages, the navigators' bodies released a steady, elevated stream of vasopressin and oxytocin, the same chemicals that flood a mother's bloodstream the moment her child is born, the same soft rush that binds lovers when they touch. Levels stayed high for weeks, far longer than in any land-based activity ever measured. The longer they navigated without instruments, the stronger the flow became, until the hormones reached concentrations normally seen only in moments of profound human connection. The navigators themselves were not surprised. They had always spoken for centuries about loving certain stars, about missing a favorite swell the way you miss a person, about the quiet ache when clouds hid the sky for too many nights. To them, the ocean and the heavens were not scenery, they were family. And now, the blood tests proved it. The brain and body treated prolonged wayfinding as a state of continuous, chosen attachment. Oxytocin sharpens social memory. Vasopressin strengthens spatial memory and vigilance. Together they forged an almost addictive bond between the sailor and the night itself. Miss a voyage for a season, and the levels dropped. The navigator grew restless, irritable, the way a new parent feels separated from a child. Return to the canoe, and the chemistry surged again, warm and certain. They did not navigate by the stars. They fell in love with them, night after night, until the stars loved them back with perfect directions. The implications reached further than anyone expected. If the brain structure and blood chemistry could adapt this deeply to an ancient skill, then perhaps the skill itself was never truly lost, only sleeping. And in the most unlikely corners of the modern world, people have begun waking it up again. Look now at a desert night in Nevada. A special forces team lies on their backs while an instructor points out star paths their grandfathers never knew existed. In a windowless room beneath Houston, astronauts practice finding Polaris with a sextant and then without, because one solar flare could erase every satellite tomorrow. On a frozen lake in northern Sweden, teenagers from the Sami reindeer trails learn to read the same unmoving star their ancestors trusted 1,000 years ago. Survival schools in Colorado teach civilians to release caged finches at dawn and follow their flight. Yacht captains in the Mediterranean quietly carry camels in their chart drawers, just in case. The Hokulea continues her endless circle of the Pacific, training new navigators every year. On Taumako, children still dive at night to read glowing coral maps their parents swear are identical to the sky. The rituals that once saved entire civilizations are now classified backup systems for people whose lives depend on never being lost, whether in a storm at sea or a dead satellite above Mars. The same gestures performed under purple Phoenician sails, under Viking dragon prows, under Maldivian lateen rigs, are being rehearsed again in silence, passed hand to hand like a secret that refused to stay buried. The night sky has not changed. The human brain that can speak its language has not vanished. It has only been waiting for the moment we need it again. And that moment, though few dare say it aloud, may be closer than we think. Tonight, 8 out of every 10 people alive will go to bed beneath a sky too bright to show more than a dozen stars. In cities that never sleep, the Milky Way has become a myth told in old books. Streetlights, billboards, phone screens, we have wrapped the planet in a permanent orange haze that erases the map our ancestors spent lifetimes learning to read. We are the first civilization in history to deliberately switch off the ceiling that once guided every voyage, every migration, every prayer. Stand outside any major city after midnight and lift your eyes. The darkness you expect is simply gone. Instead, there is a dull, bruised glow that swallows everything beyond the street. Children grow up believing the night sky is black, with a few polite pinpricks. They have never seen the great silver river that once poured from horizon to horizon. They have never felt the hush that falls when 10,000 stars appear at once, and the world suddenly feels enormous again. We tell ourselves the loss is harmless. Progress demands light. Safety demands light. Yet something inside the human animal grieves without words. Astronomers measure it in Bortle scales and light pollution maps. Therapists see it in rising rates of disconnection, insomnia, the strange new ache of people who feel homeless on their own planet. We turned on the lights to see where we were going, and accidentally blinded ourselves to where we truly are. The map our ancestors died to read has not vanished. We simply chose to look away. But in the middle of that self-made darkness, something quiet and stubborn has begun to stir.
On rooftop gardens in Tokyo, office workers spread yoga mats at 2 a.m. and learn to find Arcturus through the glow of a million neon signs. In Oslo, teenagers who have never seen a horizon sail small boats across fjords using only the sunstone trick their grandparents forgot. On Maldivian resorts that once banned night diving, young dive masters now guide guests to reefs where plankton still draw glowing constellations on the sand. And every year, more children, born under light domes so thick the stars were fairy tales, sign up for voyages on Hokulea and her growing fleet of sister canoes. They come from everywhere. A software engineer from Mumbai quits his job to apprentice in Micronesia. A Parisian chef spends vacations learning the Kamal on dhows off Zanzibar. A Detroit high school class crowdfunds a trip to Hawaii because their teacher promised that the sky still speaks if you shut off your phone long enough to hear it. They are 20, 30, sometimes 40 years old and have never known only artificial nights. Yet when they step onto a canoe deck and the captain kills every light, something ancient wakes up behind their eyes. Hokulea herself has become a wandering university. She has sailed to New York, to Tokyo, to Rapa Nui, to the edge of the Arctic Circle, carrying the same message. The map is still there. Every port she visits, hundreds of new students climb aboard, learn one star path, then another, until the old chants rise again in languages their great-grandparents never spoke. Children who grew up believing the Milky Way was a candy bar now stand on swaying at the helm, while the real galaxy burns overhead like spilled salt. They return home changed. Some install dark sky lights in their neighborhoods. Others teach neighbors how to find south using only the moon's horns. A few simply lie on their roofs once a week and let the sky pour back into them, drop by drop. The resurgence is not nostalgia, it is correction. A generation raised inside screens is choosing to step outside and remember how to be lost in the best possible way. And they are discovering something no one predicted. In the summer of 2024, researchers took 30 complete beginners, people who could barely tell Venus from an airplane light, and gave them 8 weeks of intensive training. Daily star path memorization, swell reading in wave tanks, bird release drills at dawn. Then they put them on a boat in the North Atlantic during storm season and turned off every electronic navigation device. For 6 days, the sky stayed hidden behind cloud. GPS stayed dead. The novices stood watch barefoot, feeling the ocean's arguments beneath the hull, whispering half-remembered chants into the wind. When the storm finally broke and satellites came back online, the boat was less than 4 miles from its intended landfall after a 400-mile passage. The professionals watching the data feed sat in stunned silence. 8 weeks to relearn what took our ancestors 8,000 years to perfect. The hippocampus measurements taken before and after showed the same swelling seen in master navigators. The blood tests showed the same soft flood of oxytocin and vasopressin. The human animal had not only remember how, it is hungry to remember. The night has not stopped speaking. We only stopped listening. And now that we have begun again, there is one final ritual, older than Polynesia, older than Phoenicia, older than any name we have for North, that has started to surface on the longest night
when the sun dies longest and the stars burn closest.
In the far north, when the sun slips below the horizon and refuses to return for weeks, the oldest navigators once performed a ceremony no outsider was ever meant to witness. The same ritual appeared, unconnected, among the Inuit of the Arctic ice, the Sami of the frozen tundra, and certain Polynesian masters who sailed deliberately into southern winter. They called it different names, but the act was identical. 3 days and 3 nights without sleep, lying flat on deck or sled, eyes fixed on the turning sky, until the body surrendered and the stars walked straight into the mind. They began at the moment the sun vanished on winter solstice. No food after the first evening, only water and silence. The chosen navigator, sometimes barely more than a boy, sometimes an elder saying goodbye, was wrapped in furs or pandanus mats and lashed loosely to the deck so waves or exhaustion could not claim him. Then the waiting started. Hour after hour the great wheel turned overhead, Polaris burning like cold fire at the hub, every other star circling it in perfect, endless procession. Sleep was the enemy. When eyelids fell, a companion touched the navigator's cheek with snow or salt water. The point was not punishment, it was surrender. After 24 hours, the ordinary world thinned. After 48, time loosened its grip. By the third night, the boundary between sky and self dissolved. The stars no longer appeared to move. The navigator moved with them, feeling the exact tilt of the Earth, the precise angle of the pole, the slow breathing of the planet beneath flesh. Directions burned themselves in like brands. Entire oceans unfolded inside the skull, island chains glowing, swell roads drawn in light, every possible route visible at once. On the morning the sun's first rumour touched the horizon, the watchers cut the ropes. The navigator stood, shaking, weeping, smiling, and without a word, pointed to places no chart had ever named. From that day forward, he was considered complete. The sky had tattooed its map directly onto his soul. Nothing, no storm, no blindness, no lifetime, could erase it again. They never wrote the ritual down. To do so would have weakened it. The knowledge was too large for ink. It belonged only to those willing to trade 3 days of mortality for an eternity of direction. And at the center of that burning map waited one word no apprentice was allowed to hear until the third dawn. Every culture that ever reached the open ocean kept a secret name for the star that never walks. A name spoken only once in a lifetime, during the final hours of initiation, when the sky and the mind had become the same thing. In one Polynesian lineage, it is pronounced like the softest breath between waves. In an almost soundless click of the tongue, followed by a sigh that means both mother and anchor. Among certain Inuit, it is a low throat sound that cannot be written in Roman letters, a vibration felt in the sternum more than heard. The Sami call it a word that translates roughly as the eye that never blinks, but must never be stared at too long. All these names share one rule. Speak them aloud at the wrong moment, and the star turns its face away forever. You become the lost one. The name is not decoration, it is a key. When spoken correctly, at the exact instant the initiate feels the Earth's axis pass through his own heart, something shifts. The star is no longer out there. It lives behind the eyes. From that moment, the navigator carries true north inside the body, like a second heartbeat. Distance, latitude, drift, none of it matters anymore. The name has made the self and the pole the same point. Elders claimed that to hear the name too early
was to go mad from too much sky. To hear it too late was to sail competently, but never perfectly. Only when the 3-night vigil had scraped the self-rule was the tongue allowed to form the syllables, and then only once. After that, the name was simply there, silent, watchful, eternal. For centuries, the names stayed locked behind those rules. Colonial priests burned the speakers. Mission schools beat the syllables out of children. The words went underground, passed in whispers on the verge of death, hidden inside lullabies no outsider understood. Yet every culture that touched by the open water guarded its own version, proof that the sky once spoke directly to the blood. And now, after centuries of silence,
The names are rising again. A young woman stands alone in the middle of the Atacama Desert, 3,000 meters above the sea level, where the air is so dry the stars look close enough to touch. She has built no fire. She has eaten nothing for 2 days. Around her the dunes are silver with frost, but she lies on her back in only a thin wool poncho, eyes wide, watching the great wheel turn. This is not tradition. She is Chilean, raised in Santiago under orange streetlights, and yet she has come here to finish what her teacher began on a canoe deck 40 years earlier. 72 hours without sleep, 72 hours of letting the sky pour itself straight through her. On the third night, the cold no longer exists. The boundary between skin and space dissolves. She feels the slow tilt of the planet, the exact place where south becomes north inside her chest. And then, softly, the old Polynesian master who trained her, now too frail to travel, speaks the forbidden name through a satellite phone pressed to her ear. One breath, one word, nothing more. She repeats it aloud to the desert, to the listening dark. The star above her flares, or perhaps her heart does. When dawn finally bleeds across the Andes hours later, she stands. Tears freeze on her cheeks. Without compass or phone, she points across empty sand to magnetic north, with less than half a degree of error. The sky has not changed, only our willingness to listen. And somewhere, out on the breathing ocean, a canoe slides forward under sail, while a new voice, young, steady, unafraid, begins the old chant that was never truly lost. One question remains, the only one the night has been asking since the first raft left sight of land. Will you look up tonight, right now, wherever you are? The same map that once carried entire peoples across oceans is hanging just above your ceiling. It costs nothing, asks nothing, and it is waiting for you. Step outside. Yes, now. Leave the phone inside. No apps, no screens, no excuses. Just walk out and stand still for a moment. Let the night air touch your face. Let the noise of the day drain out of your ears. Look up. If you are in a city, the sky will seem poor at first. A few bright dots swimming in orange soup. That is all right. The map is still there. It is only being polite, waiting for you to show interest. Find the brightest light that is not moving. That is usually a planet, Venus or Jupiter. But tonight it will serve as your first guide. Face it. Feel the direction settle in your body the way you once felt north when you were small and the world was larger. Now turn 90 degrees to your right. Scan low along the horizon for the next brightest steady light. It may be only a handspan above the rooftops. That is your second marker. Walk 10 slow steps in its direction, then look again. The pattern is already shifting, revealing itself. The sky is not random, it is a wheel, and you have just stepped onto its rim.
If you are lucky enough to be somewhere darker, a balcony, a park, a quiet street, wait 5 more minutes. Your eyes will open like a second, slower heartbeat. Suddenly there are dozens of stars, then hundreds. The Milky Way appears as a faint road of mist. Follow it with your finger or imagination until you find the 3 bright stars of Orion's belt. They are the same 3 stars a boy on a reed raft memorized 5,000 years ago. They still point the same way. Tonight you do not need to name everything. You only need to let the wheel turn once while you watch. Feel how the stars move west together, how some rise, some set, how one patch near the pole refuses to leave its post.
That motion is the same motion that guided every voyage you have ever heard in this story. It is free. It is accurate. It is yours. Stand there until the cold creeps in or the wonder grows too large to carry. The map has already begun copying itself into you. You will feel it later, when you lie down. A quiet certainty that the night knows your name. But before you go back inside, there is one last thing the old navigators never told the strangers who begged for their secrets. Every tradition, Polynesian, Micronesian, Phoenician, Viking, Maldivian, carried a deliberate lie inside its truth. A false star path, a wrong swell direction, a bird release that led only to empty water. The lie was always beautiful, always convincing, always fatal. Apprentices were taught the false path first. They memorized it perfectly, recited it proudly, believed it completely. Only after years, after they had proven loyalty, humility, and the willingness to die rather than betray, was the mistake quietly revealed. The true path was the one that actually reached land, was hidden in plain sight beside the lie, differing by only a few degrees. To the unworthy, it looked identical. To the worthy, it was the difference between life and silence. The trap was never cruelty. It was mercy. Knowledge this powerful could not be allowed to fall into hands that would sell oceans or burn villages. So the elders built a door that only opened for patience. A raider who tortured a navigator would receive flawless instructions straight onto reef teeth. A colonial officer who copied every chant would still sail in circles until his crew starved. The sky itself became the final guardian, refusing to guide anyone who had not earned the right to arrive. You will find traces of the lie if you look closely enough. A star compass with one house deliberately misplaced. A kamal knot that is half a finger too long. A song that sounds perfect until the last verse, where the direction quietly reverses. The worthy were taught to smile when they recognized the trap, because recognizing it meant they had passed the only test that mattered. So when you stand under the sky tonight and feel the wheel begin to speak, remember, some of what you think you see may be the door, and some may be the lock. The difference is small. The consequence is everything. Listen. The ocean is still breathing out there, slow and patient. The stars are still turning, exactly as they turned when the first raft left the sight of land and trusted the dark. Nothing has been lost. Nothing has truly changed except our courage to look. The map is still free. The language is still being spoken. The night has never been empty. It has only been waiting for you to open your eyes. Walk outside tonight. Find one star that does not move. Whisper its oldest name, or make one up. It will not mind. Feel the wheel settle into your chest. And when you finally come back in, leave the lights off for a moment longer. Because somewhere a canoe is sliding across black water, guided by a voice exactly like yours.
Somewhere a child is learning the 32 houses for the first time. Somewhere an elder is smiling at the sky, because long after the engines fall silent, long after the satellites go dark, the directions will still be there, patient as tide, ancient as salt, waiting for the next pair of eyes, willing to become impossible to truly lose. The night has never been dark. It has only been waiting. Fade to the sound of waves and the slow turning of an endless river of stars.